So today, we're going to dig into this really high-stakes Pentagon press briefing on Operation Epic Fury. And what's so wild about this is that these incredibly bold claims of victory, they were made just 4 days into the conflict. So let's break down exactly what they said and what it all means.
So right out of the gate, the briefing kicks off with this incredibly blunt statement from the secretary. I mean, that's not just a claim, right? It's a full-on declaration. It really sets the tone for absolutely everything that's about to follow and frames the whole operation as one of total American dominance.
All right, so here's how we're going to break this all down. We're going to walk through the briefing in 5 key parts. First, we'll look at that really decisive message. Then, we'll dive into the claims of total air and sea control. After that, we'll examine the actual data they used to measure their impact, try to understand the strategic why behind it all, and finally, we'll touch on what they said was coming next.
All right, so let's start with part 1, that decisive message. And the thing you've got to keep in mind here, which is just crucial, is that all of these claims were made only 4 days into the operation. That's a point the officials made again and again.
And this timeline, wow, it really gives you a sense of just how fast all this happened. The operation kicks off, Iran fires back with a pretty huge barrage of attacks, and yet, by day 4, you've got officials on camera declaring historic results. The sheer speed of this victory declaration is a huge part of the message they're trying to send.
And to really hammer home just how massive this operation was, they didn't pull any punches with their comparisons. They claimed that in just those first 4 days, Epic Fury had already delivered twice the air power of the famous shock and awe campaign from the Iraq War. I mean, that's a pretty startling metric, and it's designed to convey one thing: overwhelming force. Okay, so the big question is, how did they pull this off? Well, that brings us right to their next big claim: total control of the air and the sea. This was really the foundation of the whole operation.
When it came to air power, the claim was simple and, honestly, absolute: complete control of Iranian skies. This wasn't presented as something they were trying to do, but as something they had already done. So what does complete control even mean in military speak? Well, they broke it down for everyone. They called it achieving uncontested airspace, which, in their words, means you can fly all day, all night, right over Iran, including the capital, to find and destroy targets and leaders whenever you want, without anyone being able to stop you.
And, to prove they weren't just talking, they started listing the hardware they had in the sky. We're talking about a trifecta of heavy hitters, the B-2s, B-52s, and B-1s, flying alongside drones and fighters. It paints a picture of a relentless, 24/7 presence overhead.
And if you thought that was blunt, listen to what they had to say about Iran's Navy. The secretary laid out a string of crushing adjectives, leaving zero room for doubt. I mean, there's just no room for interpretation there, is there? The message is crystal clear. The Iranian Navy is finished.
And they put a number on it, a really stark one. They said more than 20 Iranian naval vessels, including a submarine, were neutralized. All of that in the first 103 hours of the campaign. Think about that. That's like one ship getting taken out every 5 hours.
But buried in that number was this one really specific historic detail they wanted everyone to hear. They announced that a U.S. submarine had sunk an Iranian warship with a torpedo. And they made a huge point of saying this was the first time that had happened in combat since World War II. It's all about showing off a very specific and very deadly capability.
All right, so they've claimed total dominance. But how do they back that up? Let's get into the actual data, the numbers they presented to try and quantify their success.
One of the key pieces of evidence they showed was this chart. The whole point was to prove that the enemy was losing its ability to fight back. And the numbers are pretty dramatic, right? Ballistic missile launches, down 86%. Drone attacks, down 73%.
And it wasn't just about defense. They also talked about their own offensive numbers. They stated that in those same first 103 hours, U.S. and allied forces had hit over 2,000 targets inside Iran. That is just an insane operational pace.
But it wasn't all about hardware and statistics. They also gave this really chilling assessment of what was happening to Iran's leadership. The secretary described them as dead, missing, or cowering in bunkers. Basically, they're painting a picture of total chaos at the top, a command structure that's completely broken. So, that naturally leads to the big question: why? What was the whole point of all this? Let's get into the strategic why behind the operation and the role their allies played. Okay, so the chairman broke it down into 3 clear military goals. First, get rid of Iran's ballistic missiles. Second, completely destroy their navy. And third, and this is the longer-term play, make absolutely sure they can't just rebuild their military strength right after this is all over.
But those were just the military objectives. The ultimate goal, the big why they kept coming back to, was this: cutting off Iran's path to getting a nuclear bomb. That was pitched as the #1 reason for the whole operation.
Now, they were also really careful to point out that this wasn't just a U.S. thing. They made sure to frame it as a coalition effort, listing off all these regional partners, Jordan, the Gulf nations, and they emphasized that these allies were using their own stuff, their own defense systems to intercept Iranian attacks. So, last but not least, what's next? You might think after all this, things would start to wind down, but no, the message was the exact opposite. As one official put it, the throttle is coming up. They were signaling that things were about to get even more intense. And this ramp-up involved a big tactical change. See, they explained that at the beginning, they were using what are called standoff munitions, long-range weapons fired from a safe distance. But now that they claimed to own the skies, they were switching to stand-in munitions. We're talking about things like massive GPS-guided bombs being dropped right from overhead. The idea is to apply way more pressure, way more precisely.
But, this whole thing wasn't just a lecture. There was a Q&A session. And that's when a reporter from the BBC brought up a really tough question about a reported strike that hit a girls' school in southern Iran.
In the official response, well, it was short. He basically just said they were looking into it. Twice. And that moment, it just created this incredible contrast, didn't it? You have this whole briefing filled with these absolute claims of precision and historic success, and then it's all punctuated by this really critical, unanswered question. And that kind of leaves us right in the middle of that classic tension you see in any war, the huge gap between the official story and the messy, complicated reality on the ground.